I'll be honest, the last thing I thought of when I read and watched the sci-fi series Dune was that I'd be playing a strategy game in this universe right now. But here we are, as Dune Spice Wars takes the iconic series into the realm of video games. I've sat down with the game for a good amount of hours now, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. Be mindful that this is an early access game though, so even though the game is playable and actually surprisingly polished, many features are yet to be implemented, like a fully fledged campaign mode and a multiplayer option, which I think sounds like a lot of fun. And if that sounds good to you, I really hope you leave a like and consider supporting me further, either by becoming a channel member or a patron. Thank you so much to my current supporters as well, you're just awesome. And now, an early access review of Dune Spice Wars. If you've ever come close to anything Dune related, you probably know that this is a dark sci-fi universe. I think it's an apt description to call it something of a Game of Thrones in space, even though they're quite different. The reason for this comparison is that there's a fair amount of intrigue in Dune, and the brutality of the universe should be lost on no one. If it's not obvious yet, Dune Spice Wars takes place on Arrakis, or indeed, Dune itself. It's a mostly barren planet filled with sands and deserts as far as the eye can see. It's a planet of scarcity, and those who try to exploit its resources rarely fare better than its native population. I think one of the best things about Dune Spice Wars is that it really captures this sense of scarcity and feeling of barely hanging on, including those massive dangers of the desert. Every faction begins with nothing more than a capital and an ornithopter, a sort of in-universe helicopter which allows you to begin exploring the lands around you. This reveals one of Dune's most important aspects, namely exploration, which, even though it's a part of every 4X game, is made even more pressing in Dune, as right from the get-go, you're already on the clock and meant to pay taxes to the Empire in form of spice. Spice is of course the name of the game in Dune. Spice is the all-important and extremely valuable resource that everyone's looking for, but in this vast desert, spice is only found below the sands. The ornithopters are therefore crucial as you scour the lands for spice, but you'll find many other things on the way as well, like towns and other resources. An immediate need for resources showcase the brutality of Dune, and it's one of the things Spice Wars does best. Everything requires a resource to function, whether that be spice for taxes, gold for building and recruiting which you can earn by trading away spice, materials for buildings, fuel for engines, manpower for soldiers and workers, and even water for the survival of these as well. Unlike spice, these resources are gathered by erecting certain buildings in your towns, but what's fun here as well is that the amount of resources you gain per building is determined by the local geography of the town. For example, the amount of wind in a province determines how much water is gathered by the corresponding building, and the same goes for territories who can harbor some nice boost modifiers to production. Another part of this equation is that buildings in Dune don't just cost that one-time fee, but they actually require upkeep costs as well. This is partly what makes the game so interesting, as you always have to be mindful of not only what you can afford right now, but what you might be able to afford to keep running in the future as well. Being low on manpower, for example, will stop your troops from replenishing and keep you from recruiting anymore, and your troops must remain close to towns in order to refill their supplies, which they will spend on journeys outside your territory. But there's more than just resources to be mindful of here. The lands of Dune are made harsher by the fact that massive sandstorms can appear, which will wreck your spice harvesters and armies if you're not careful. More than that, enormous sandworms feel the vibration of topside activity, and unless you manage to escape or evacuate in time, your machines and soldiers are forfeit, potentially dealing massive blows to your economy and defense. All of these aspects are made even more pressing by the fact that number 1, Dune is not restricted to hexagon-shaped tiles, meaning that everything looks so smooth and nice. And number 2, that Dune is a real-time strategy game, not turn-based like many other 4X games, which makes the entire experience so much more fun and exciting. Dune further impresses by offering 4 factions with highly unique sides to them. House Atreides, for example, housing the main characters of the books and movies, excel at diplomatic politics, giving them a boost to influence points. Their unique feature is being able to diplomatically annex neutral settlements in exchange for resources, and even though it might take 15 days to do so, it's a great way to save on soldiers' lives and to expand in many directions at once. The more evil Harkonnen faction are much more militaristic, getting boosts to oppression and better starting units, but lack the diplomatic skills of the Atreides. Both of these factions assume a larger role in the Imperial Council. Here, various edicts are up for vote every few months, and must be decided on by the houses. Influence points are used to sway the votes, so a balancing act is required to succeed here as well. It's important to be mindful of whether you want to acquire bonuses for yourself or lay burdens on others, if you find yourself in the unlucky position of not being able to afford both. On the opposite end we have the Fremen, those native to Arrakis. The Fremen are not the strongest nor the most diplomatic, yet they offer boons not available to the Atreides or the Harkonnens. The Fremen much more easily use Arrakis for their own good. An example of this is that the spice harvesters of the Fremen never attract sandworms, so there's no worrying about being sabotaged here. Another is that Fremen armies can actually ride sandworms, which is an awesome way to get from one place to another in record time. They can also try to sabotage the other factions via the Imperial Council. The unique features of each faction can further be customized by the important characters you choose to begin the game with. A part difficulty slider, part feature choice in a sense. But Dune is also warfare, and might be one of those aspects that'll take you unawares. You see, every settlement will either have to be taken by force or by diplomatic means if you're using diplomatic points as the Atreides. This means that you'll need an army, as each settlement houses a varying amount of militia troops. Failing to win here can set you back, but the harshest failures come from being invaded by roaming rebels. If you forget to keep your cities defended, you're more than likely to have your investments taken from you. Luckily, you don't necessarily need armies to keep watch here. Each city lets you recruit local militia to defend them, a feature which took me quite a while to figure out actually. It'll cost you gold and manpower of course, but it's a cost and time efficient way to keep your cities and resources at least relatively safe. If I had to nitpick a little, I'd have to say that the animated style of Spice Wars doesn't really mesh well with the harsh vibe of the books or the movies. Dune Spice Wars is clean, cute, and approachable, while the Dune universe itself is anything but. It's not a major issue, but the game's visuals and subject matter causes a certain amount of cognitive dissonance in the mood it wants to convey, and I think perhaps a more realistic style would have worked nicely as well. That's not to say the game isn't pretty though. I actually think Dune looks very visually pleasing, and even though I think the units and buildings could have offered a bit more detail and less generic looks, the graphics themselves are clean and just nice to look at. I think a full release could benefit a lot from something of a more directed campaign mode when one gets tired of the more sandboxy nature of the game, and a multiplayer option would be really fun as well. That being said, Dune Spice Wars offers some of the most fun I've had in a 4X game in a long time, much of which is owed to its many features that come together so well. The utmost reliance on resources, the risks of looking for spice, the ability to regulate how much spice you produce versus how much you sell for gold, and the unique features of each faction, coupled with the fact that it's all happening in real time, makes a 4X game that feels fresh and exciting, and that's exactly what Dune Spice Wars needed to be. Thank you so much for watching. I've had a lot of fun with Dune, and I'm sure you would too if you're into these types of games. Let me know what you think of Dune Spice Wars, and if you enjoyed the video, I really hope you leave a like, and consider supporting me as a channel member or a patron. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.